I want to welcome all our panel members from all over the world this morning. They will be joining us online. Please be aware that there's a translator option today. If you're French speaking, please press the French button. And if you're English speaking, please press the English button. The physical attendees today, please remember there's a mic in front of you. If you want to ask a question, switch on your mic, and afterwards switch off your mic, please. And then I want to welcome Yanni de Villiers as well. He's a facilitator today. Welcome, Yanni. And I think we should start today with a prayer. So let's go.
Good day. Today I want to talk about the anchors in life, or your anchors in life. I read a fantastic part in scripture in Acts 27, and that was where Paul was sailing to Rome to go and defend his case in front of Caesar. And the anchors, in this part they mention anchors 4 times. The first time in verse 13 is when they lifted anchor and they actually left the port to sail to Rome. The second part was when there was a storm in verse 17, and they said, it says here, they lowered the sea anchor. Now, I didn't know what a sea anchor. I was born in the Free State and in agriculture, definitely not in fisheries. So I read up about a sea anchor. It's almost like a parachute. They've dropped it behind the ship to slow it down, because they were drifting from course, and they just tried to weather the storm. The third time is when they dropped the 4 anchors because they were worried and trying to steady the ship. Now, this is where we're going to focus today. And the last time was when they actually eventually cut the anchors, and the ship was then, smashed on the rocks, and that was the end of the ship. So in verse 29 of Acts chapter 27, it says, fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. Now, my question to you is, what are your anchors when the storms of life is happening around you and things are not as planned, and you can sort of see the similar picture that these guys were having? Maybe you can say, one of my anchors is like my internal strength and my experience, and I, through my experience and all my skills and qualifications, I will be able to weather the storm. The second one that I thought of was, having mentors around you that can give you good advice when it is storm. I always had, at least a mentor in terms of a business mentor. I had one in terms of life. I had a few in terms of my spiritual life. And those were people that were sort of running ahead of me in life, and they will be able to calm me down when storms were around me. Just to remember and bear in mind that these guys were sailing for 14 days in a storm without seeing the sun or the stars. And there were no GPSs in those days, so they were really lost, and they didn't have mentors or anything to bear with their direction. But you can also say maybe you've got a set of good principles on which you based all your decisions. These guys knew that they had to make the ship lighter. They actually threw the cargo overboard to try and survive this storm. Luckily, they didn't throw the anchors or cut the anchors off to make the ship lighter, because that would have been a very bad decision going forward. Maybe you can be like some of them, saying, but I've got a lot of hope for the future. These guys at one stage said, but we think we are close to the land. They couldn't see, it was dark, it was at night. And maybe you in a season of your life where you say, well, the end is near, you still have hope, and this is what is anchoring you. You could also say, but my anchor in life is my spiritual disciplines, that I read the Bible and I pray and I do some ministry, and like Paul did on the ship, where they ate together and they actually prayed together, like it says in the scripture, for daylight. Or your quiet time. It was wonderful to see that Paul actually heard the Lord whilst the storm was going. So don't think that you can't hear the Lord properly when the storm is around you. but you're going to have to focus. You're going to have to sit down and do some quiet time with the Lord. Now, I want to conclude with the 4 anchors that I've used in my life, and that doesn't mean you have to do it, but these were the 4 that really worked for me. The first one is, when I was in a storm, I really did a lot of scripture reading, and I was looking for examples in the Bible anywhere with some principles in it in a similar situation to find a way forward, and I really got some good guidance from doing that. So when there's a storm around you, make use of that. The second one is to trust the Lord in everything. I wrote a lot in my journals when I was in a storm, so that I can learn from it, and if you read it afterwards, it will actually encourage you and strengthen you. I also spend a lot of time talking to my wife. I've been married for 37 years. This is the person closest to me, and I spend a lot of time talking to her and getting her advice, because if she was not really exactly in the storm, she could from outside give me some good advice. And as I said, I also make use of quite a few mentors in my life, and I was very happy that I actually started off with that at a fairly young age. The last one is probably for me was the most difficult one, and that is when you're in a storm, keep your mouth closed and open your ears. If your mouth is open, you might take up some seawater and it's salty and it's not lekker. So this is a time to maybe quiet yourself and focus more and listen more. It will be better. Let me say a prayer for us. Father, we come to you as our anchor in life. And we know, Lord, that there will be storms in our lives. And some of us sitting here today, we're experiencing a lot of storms, but we want to reach out to you to be our anchor and to help us to weather the storm so that we can fulfill the calling that you've got on our lives. And we pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Yanni, thank you for that beautiful message. I think first and foremost, we want to thank our sponsors. They're definitely our anchors that steady our ship. Our platinum sponsors is Africa Grain Management and John Deere Financial. Gold sponsorships is ABSA and Strategic Stargate Scientific. Silver sponsors is Nedbank, NWK, Senvest, and Standard Bank. Our bronze sponsorships are Agri Enviro Solutions, F&B, OVK, Ronin Solutions, Santam Agriculture, Centraal Suid Koöperasie, VKB, and WAM South Africa. And Vessel, I want to call you up to explain to us what will happen today.
Casper, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Casper. So I just want to remind us that we also have a French audience. The attendance yesterday, online and in the auditorium, was nearly about 390 people that attended this online and auditorium session. I also want to thank our Plaas Media and Farmers Weekly and also Landbouw Weekblad, our media partners. So our media partners for today, it will be Farmers Weekly, Magda, that will announce at the end of the session who's going to receive Wandile's book. Wandile already sold out 5,000 copies. So Magda, all the best for that, thank you. And then to accommodate the translators, I'm going to speak a bit slowly. I'm almost going to read this out, our introduction, so just bear with me. So Agbiz grain members handle grain as food to meet our responsibilities in the food supply chain, to serve our customers and store food safely. We handle and store about 70% of all the grains that's produced in South Africa. Now, the JSE registered silos are required to qualify as food business operators and are audited by the PPCB every 2 years. And Niels from the PPCB is also in the audience. All of this is to ensure that storage operators safely store grain for use as a primary source of food and feed, in addition to good storage practices. Storage operators must comply with laws and regulations governing the storage and handling of grain to meet the needs of our customers, the grain processors and consumers. Now this is where compliance and traceability become part of handling and storage. There is a difference between compliance and traceability. A clear distinction should be made when discussing the principles of compliance and traceability as part of a generic or a differentiated passport system. Now, a differentiated passport system is, for instance, exactly for canola and barley, mostly where there's one buyer. But the generic passport system is where you implement something like that for a total maize production, total maize value chain. Okay, so Agbiz Grain members, we are well aware that we store food, not only grain. We comply with the laws and regulations governing the storage sector. We have accurate and comprehensive records in place, and compliance is not a problem. We have introduced an Agbiz Grain Food Safety Code of Conduct to inform customers and consumers that we adhere to high standards. It forms part of our storage agreements with producers and buyers already. Storage operators receive grain in accordance with the grading requirements of the Agricultural Product Standards Act. Grading is conducted in accordance with the grading regulations. Now this is very important. So when you receive stock from the producer to the storage operator, the intake of that grain is based on the grading regulations, and it's a sensory or a visual exercise. So if you want to sign off the risk or to prevent the risk to take in grain that's going to give you problems in long-term storage in terms of mycotoxins, and it's required by the members of the supply chain from the producer to the end consumer, it is actually our responsibility to be very strict on that. Now, this is the catch. Mycotoxins and minimum residue levels, which is now the pesticides. Minimum residue levels are not determined accurately or at all at intake due to a lack of accurate testing equipment or inability to determine it at intake. These are probably the most important factors in relation to food safety and for which traceability is needed. The question is, how do we monitor grain accurately enough to effectively prevent the intake of grain that does not meet traceability requirements? If testing becomes a requirement and the equipment is available to detect mycotoxins and MRLs, and Professor Herberg from the Iowa State University will also tell you that we talk here about carbon and that carbon footprint of grains. And if technology developed, traceability may be easier. So, if testing becomes a requirement and the equipment is available to detect mycotoxins and MRLs, the additional equipment and operational costs at intake will need to be recovered at the first point of delivery. Only then will it be possible to detect a breach of these limits before intake. But at what cost? How do we ensure compliance and traceability for these challenging issues, particularly with the commingling of grain in bulk storage facilities? How do the different links in the grain industry chain receive assurance from the previous link in the chain in terms of compliance and traceability? The storage operator can be held responsible for what happens while the grain is on his premises, but not for the risks that arise before the grain is received and cannot be identified at intake. The margins in the storage sector are squeezed. We already learned about that the previous 2 days, compared to those in the primary production and processing sectors, and are under real threat. So this is our summary. It takes a while to do it, but I think for our French counterparts, we have to do it like that. So thank you, Jannie. Jannie is the former CEO of Grain SA on the producer side, but Jannie is also, he was also the former CEO at the National Chamber of Milling. And Jannie, when we thought about a facilitator and you agreed to help us out, I thought you would be the perfect body to do the facilitation for us today. All the best. I think you have a very difficult session to lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Wessel. I've looked at the audience while you were reading so slowly, and they all looked like you are talking French. They didn't follow you so well. No, but thank you very much. Yes, this is quite a challenging exercise that we're trying to do today, not just on the subject matter, but also technology-wise. We've got people that is all abroad and some in the studio here. So, and my ego will definitely handle it. So if I miss a hand or something, please help me and indicate to me. I won't mind that much. When I started thinking about the traceability, you know, in my days, when I was in France at one stage, they were very much worried about installing some, photography equipment in the lines to find the insect legs. And I thought, these guys are really crazy. We eat those stuff in Africa. But in any case, today is definitely a different ball game. And also what I've learned so far with the traceability subject matter that is very difficult is, and this is my first hint to all of you who are in the value chains to deal with this, is to find a scapegoat so that you at least have somebody to blame if something goes wrong. And I think this is almost what is happening if I read about this. But we've got very clued up people that have some experience of this subject matter in the world, and we're going to give them each a chance to share a bit of what they've learned so far, that we can learn from that. So we're not going to start with questions immediately. You are most welcome to post your questions online. And I've warned a few people in the audience that you are also going to be part of the panel here in the audience, because I've seen the last 2 days you are very slow with the questions. But there's very knowledgeable people sitting in the audience that's going to help us today to share some of the information. I was very encouraged last night. I received from one of the panel members yesterday a minute of the meetings that was held on the Maize Forum Trade Committee meeting, where we are as South Africa. And initially I thought we are way behind, but what I've read last night really encouraged me. So we are not just starters or sort of in class RR. I think there has been some progress, and I want to congratulate the private sector role players for moving ahead to meet the demands of these consumers. So technology can't sort of resolve all of these problems. You know, today, I think the new generation, and pardon me for saying that, they think you use, you read GDP and then you can solve traceability as well. Het gaan nie so werk nie. Bad luck for julle. We need to do more work on this, and especially I've listened to Willie talking about when he grew citrus, how they can take one lemon or one orange and they can actually trace who was you know, the guy who packed it? Did the guy who actually packed it washed his hands and all those sort of things? Now, we've got a wheat breeder online today. I'm going to introduce him soon. I don't think he can breed a sort of a wheat kernel that can tell you, you know, who planted this and, you know, which tractor driver did the planting and those sort of things. So in grain, it's a lot more challenging. So don't underestimate the hill that you are up against when we talk about the traceability. So I just want to make sure in terms of traceability, I think we're not going to focus today as much on the quality side of things. There's a quality traceability thing. The grading system is well established. I think that is not probably where our focus is going to be, although we can talk about it. I think the origin is one of the bigger things that we need to talk about as a second leg. The third one is on the safety. I think these are the issues that the consumers are also very much worried about. And then the last one that I haven't seen a lot in South Africa is our sustainability side of things. How do we deal with the planet? You know, when you read the stuff from the Green Deal and the European Union that they want to implement, and they want to start measuring the carbon, you know, that you've used in your production process and in your processing processes. You know, I was thinking, who would be the inspectorate in South Africa that's going to check that out? You know, and I haven't seen those people. There might be some business opportunities here, but this is traceability stuff that I don't think, you know, we have to listen today very nicely to what especially our partners in the other countries are doing on this matter, so that we can learn from them specifically. I'm saying a lot, but I also want to define a little bit, and Casper is going to help me out with the definitions on it. But I also just want to say one thing from a personal perspective there. When we talk food security, the very first thing when you look at the basic stuff that you learn in Economics 101 when you're at the university is the availability. You must have food to survive. That's the first thing. The second thing is, can you afford it? And if you can afford it, then you can start making demands on your safety issues. So those are, I think, and then maybe lastly on the sustainability side of food security. So always when I was in the international arena and we talk about food security, you know, for me, I'm thinking about this guy that stands next to my car, you know, with his bucket in his hand. That is for me food security, you know, and I'm not sitting on a sofa watching a TV screen of people in Africa that is hungry when you deal with food security. So sometimes I'm worried, and I've listened last week in BFAP when they mentioned the European Union's new regulations that's coming out and things like that to deal with the safety issues and the planet issues is actually forcing the production down in the European Union in agriculture. Now, when you're in Africa and you see these people and you physically meet them when you walk in the streets and you visit them in their houses, food security is a different thing than sitting in a room, you know, almost like the farmers always tell me, you sit in your air-conditioned office and you make decisions for us. This is very difficult when you form policy and you make decisions. And you will hear from Charles today from the US, you know, what is actually achievable and where are the policy makers in terms of their demands and the consumers. So there's a gap that we're going to have to manage. And hopefully today we will get some information from the speakers to deal with that. So just to introduce the panel quickly to you, you've got their CVs with you, but Paul Adams is from PepsiCo. Paul was farming at one stage. When I met him, I heard about that. He was managing a silo complex, and today he's working for PepsiCo. And he had some experiences of recalling a product in the grain sector. So he will share today some of that experience with us. And I was just wondering, you know, have you thought about it if somebody asked you to recall a silo bin? Tom, dis 'n groot gemors. Let's not go there today. We will probably hear a little bit of how do you deal with recalling of products. Then we've got David, who's the guy in France, and he specifically asked us as an audience to ask him questions about the Rugby World Cup. No, we're not there today, but we wish him luck. I think they will probably need it to host the. So David Meder is from Group
EMC2, and it's almost like a coöperatie, a cooperative, and he will deal with us the experiences that they are having in France and doing that. Then Dr. Charles Herberg, he's from the Iowa State University, and I've enjoyed the information that he shared with us in the preparations coming up to this. Then Casper Schmidt, you've met here, he's with me, he's the brave one who was sitting with me, not behind the screen today. Casper, thank you for being here. He's executive member of Agbiz Grain, but he's also with BKB Grain Co. And then lastly is Dr. Francois Koekemoer. He is our wheat breeder. He's currently with Syngenta. And Francois is probably our best wheat breeder in the country currently, and we are very privileged to have him also on the group to share with us their knowledge. So I'm going to kick off and ask Paul Adams if you can switch on your camera, Paul. I think you're more or less in the same time zone. I think for Charles we will have to be a little bit more gracious, because I think it's like 1 o'clock in the morning there. I don't know what time it exactly is, but let's start then with Paul Adams and ask Paul, in 10 minutes, Paul, the short version of some of the experiences that the audience can learn from, please.
Yeah. Morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. So, yeah, very interesting topic, this. And I'm just going to start by saying that this is actually not this is not a South African problem. This is a global problem with the cereals trade in terms of difficulties with traceability and compliance. For me, traceability is actually a part of compliance. Any compliance standard will have traceability as a key part. So they go hand in hand. But I think from our point of view, and many food manufacturers, we're increasingly getting asked questions by regulators, NGOs, our investors, and most importantly, our consumers. They're all looking for increased transparency about food safety. How is their food produced? How can we demonstrate that it's produced with food safety in mind and sustainability? And pesticides are becoming an increasing risk to our business in that arena. We've got environmental groups continuing to publish data about pesticides in our food. For example, glyphosate in oats has been a really big thing in the press over the last few years. Lots of legal cases against Monsanto. And just very recently, another environmental group in the US published data about chlormacquat in oats. Now, we think that data may not be totally accurate, but there is also good evidence that consumers don't trust what government tell them. They don't necessarily trust what scientists tell them or food manufacturers, but they are listening to environmental groups. So that causes them some anxiety. And we are constantly getting questions from consumers about, what are you guys doing with pesticides in your food, in our food? So that for us is very important. And I think in Vessel's introduction just now, and he was talking about grading grain coming into store. And I think in the grain industry, a lot of people only think about quality in terms of grading. So is it the right moisture content? Has it got the right protein level? Is it the right bushel weight? And that's what people think of as in terms of quality with grains. But in fact, there's a whole other side of that, which Vessel also touched on, which is what's the mycotoxin level? Are there any pesticide MRLs? What about heavy metals and other contaminants? And that's a sort of hidden quality, but it's an equally important, if not more important quality, because it's all things that can't be seen. If you're an expert in grains, you can pick up a handful of wheat and you can have a pretty good idea as to the quality in terms of grading of that wheat. If you pick up a handful of wheat, you've actually got no idea what the pesticide levels are in there, or the mycotoxin loading, or whether it has any heavy metals. And this is really where the traceability comes into account. The other interesting thing in Vessel's introduction was that stores can only be held responsible for managing the grain whilst it's in their care. And to a certain extent, that is true. But as Jenny said, a lot of people are looking for a scapegoat. And the issue is that if you're a store that is supplying grains to food manufacturers or animal feed manufacturers, and subsequently they find a problem, you're the supplier and they're going to come back to you to recover their costs. And if you don't have traceability in place, you aren't able to go back any further to try and identify the cause of that problem. So to give you an example, I was involved in a case a number of years ago when I was managing the Red Tractor scheme and also the GAFTA Trade Assurance scheme in the UK, where we had a case of the regulator in Ireland had gone in and picked a bag of flour off a shelf in a supermarket, and they tested it. And it came back positive for CIPC. So for those of you who don't know, that is a potato sprout suppressant. It is not approved for use on wheat. It should not have been in there. And whilst it was only detected at low levels, that was a regulatory compliance issue, and that not allowed to be in that flour. So that was then subsequently traced back to the flour miller. They traced the batch code back to a shipment of grain that came from southern England. And that was then traced back to that storage facility, port facility that had loaded the cargo ship. That was at the point at which I got involved because we certified that store under GAFTA. And there was every chance that we had also certified the farm under the Red Tractor Cereals Combinable Crop Scheme. So the store used their traceability. They knew exactly which farmers had delivered into the silo or silos that had been used to load that ship. And so that's where the hard work began. So out of that list of farmers, we looked to see how many of those farms had grown potatoes within the last 10 years. And so that narrowed those farms down. And then we started going out and looking on those farms. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we eventually identified the particular farm that had got this problem. They hadn't actually grown potatoes for 10 years on their farm, but what they had done in the previous year was completely rejuvenated their grain store, which had originally, under a previous owner, been the potato store. And CIPC, which is now banned in Europe, in fact, it gets right into the fabric of the building. So they had like a wooden drive-on aeration floor in their store, but it had got very old and they were having a problem with rodents. So they decided to take all that out and were then back to the original concrete floor. And what had happened was that every time they tipped their grain onto the floor and they used their bucket loader to push the grain up into the heap, they were pushing up concrete dust, and that was enough to contaminate that grain, 600 tons of grain, to contaminate that with CIPC. Unfortunately for the farm, by the time we discovered that, they had just completed their following harvest and they had got a barn full of contaminated barley, which then had to be destroyed. So that's a good example of where traceability can work. And it starts from the store having pretty good intake records, so they know which farms have delivered into those stores. But I think in the UK, we're in a rather unique position because we do have a farm assurance scheme for cereals. We also have other schemes that cover road transport of grains and storage, merchants, and also grain laboratories. So we have like an end-to-end system, but that's quite unique, and many other regions in the world don't have that. And I think this is one of the big problems is as a storekeeper, as Vessel said, how does each link in the chain get assurance from the previous link that everything is correct? And I think this is where we have a big gap in the cereals industry, in that there is no assurance at farm level. So as a storekeeper, you're taking in grain, you're grading it to the grading quality regulations, but there is no pesticide testing going on. There's no MRL testing going on, and those are expensive and complicated tests. And for sure, most of the recalls and issues that come about come about because regulators have gone out and picked off product off shelf. And some of these recalls, they cost millions of dollars. Some of these recalls, so it's it is a very risky area. So I think as a storekeeper, you're never going to reduce the risk 100%. You can never reduce any risk 100%. But what can you do to mitigate the risk? And what are you asking your farmers? What assurances are you getting from your farmers that they are following good agricultural practices? And I think this is a big area in terms of traceability that is missing in the cereals industry, because we don't have that. We don't have that in place. And I think food safety is everybody's business, and it starts at the farm, at the producer, and moves its way back up.
Yeah, Paul, thank you very much. I think this is very useful for us, and also sharing your experience with that recall or trying to find the exact farmer. Before you switch off your camera, I've got a quick question for you, just on what would you guess at the moment would be the percentage between the safety demands coming from the consumers and the environmental demands? Is it a 80-20 thing at the moment? Is it a 90-10 thing? Or what would you say is the ratio of demands coming to a processor like Pepsi? Go.
I think in terms of questions coming in from consumers, I think there are probably more questions coming in about levels of pesticides, especially in the US, where the glyphosate issue has been huge. I think we get more questions about that than we do environmental questions, but we would probably be putting more data out into the public arena about what we're doing from an environmental perspective.
Okay, so very, very safe answer, not to give a percentage.
Well, I'm not sure what the percentage is, that's why. So
I think that was very useful for us, but please stay online. We will have a lot of questions to you to help us understand a lot, but you can hear where he's coming from, and the experience that he shared with us is very valuable. Now we're going to move over to French. So bonjour, David. David is, as I said, from the group ECM2, and he has shared with me some of the things that he's going to share with us today. He's going to speak French, but there's going to be some translation to you. For those who are French speaking, you're going to have to log in at the moment. But David, if you can switch on your camera and come please and address us and share with us your experience, what you're doing.
Bonjour à tous. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
C'est bon? Le son est bon?
Okay, just hang on a second for the translation. Is the translation there, Armand?
Je n'ai pas de retour. Est-ce que le son fonctionne?
Can you hear me well?
Oui,
Yep.
Ça va?
You can go ahead. Thank you, David.
Oui, c'est bon. Ok, d'accord. Merci. Merci beaucoup. Alors, déjà, vous dire que je suis très heureux de participer à ce symposium avec vous sur un sujet important qui est la traçabilité des céréales. Donc,
Traceability.
David Meder.
My name is David Meder.
Un peu plus de 20 ans que je travaille
It's been
dans une coopérative agricole.
a bit more than 20 years that I've been working in an agricultural cooperative in France, which is located in the northeastern part of France. Our main business is grain and oilseeds collection. We also work in supply chain. We also work in equipment, for example, tractors that are used by farmers who are members of our cooperative. When it comes
par an, et cette collecte est mise en marché par le biais d'une
and
union
this
coopérative.
collection
Nous ne commercialisons pas nos céréales tout seuls
That means that we do not only produce our grains, we also work in partnership with a number of other stakeholders. Now, to talk about traceability, which is the topic that we're going to be discussing, I want to give you a few explanations as to the way the grain market works in France. In France, the grain market has been regulated for the past 150 years by various stakeholders involved in the sector. This is done within a framework that has been regulated since 1992. There are a number of specific documents that regulate the relationships between buyers and consumers. And these regulations provide us with a framework within which we can work and within which we can interact as various stakeholders. Those documents are focused on...
Et donc, quand il peut y avoir un litige au niveau de l'achat ou de la vente des céréales, il y a une autorité spécifique qui est là pour traiter ces litiges. Et donc, le fonctionnement du marché des grains en France est assez encadré, assez bien défini, et les acheteurs comme les vendeurs savent les règles auxquelles ils doivent se conformer. Il faut aussi que je vous précise qu'un
Also like to specify that in France, a farmer cannot sell their own produce on the market. The selling of products by farmers must be done via a grain collector who has been designated and certified by the state, which means that the French state, the French government has sat down and certified stakeholders who are considered collectors, who are going to be buying the cereals or the grains from producers before selling them on the market. So this is, in a nutshell, how the market works. Now, to go into details regarding traceability, for the past 30 years, beyond the historical expectations of
de cahiers des charges spécifiques, donc des cahiers des charges qui sont définis la plupart du temps par les clients acheteurs de céréales et donc pour lesquels nous devons nous conformer pour pouvoir réaliser la mise en marché. Alors, il y a des cahiers des charges qui traitent de la qualité.
And for those regulatory stuff, you don't get payment for. But then there's a part that is voluntary, and that is the specific customer requirements. I think that is what he's currently talking about.
Donc, je vous disais, sur la France, un certain nombre de cahiers des charges spécifiques existent. Ce peut être des cahiers des charges liés à la qualité du produit. Par exemple, l'obtention d'un taux de protéines spécifique sur le blé, mais ça peut être également un cahier des charges lié à la traçabilité du produit, où là, certains clients attendent une transparence totale sur les pratiques qui ont concouru à la production de la céréale, mais également les pratiques qui ont pu être présentes lors du stockage de cette céréale. De plus en plus, nous avons des demandes de la part de nos acheteurs pour avoir des produits sur lesquels certaines molécules de pesticides n'ont pas été utilisées. Ce sont pourtant des molécules de pesticides qui sont autorisées.
I would love for him to share with us. So, Dr. Charles, I hope that you are here and that you are up and awake this early hours of the morning. He's with the State University and he's specifically in the section of biosystems engineering.
And in our introduction, I've learned that he knows a lot about where we are, and especially with the relationships in terms of the policymakers. So Charles, we're going to pass it over to you. If you can share with us in 10 minutes or so, just introductory, your experience around this matter. Thank you.
I think there's been some crossover talk between Mr. Metter and the floor, I believe. So I'll start, but I'll try to. I think the problem is that it went over 10 minutes, and so I'm sorry, Mr. Metter. It was very interesting what you were saying. I'm Charlie Herberg. I'm from the United States University, Iowa State University. I've been there quite a number of years, and I'm in Extension, which is the university's arm for working with the general public and with industry. I also own a farm in central Iowa. It's about 600 hectares, for which there is a farmer living on it, growing corn and soybeans. And I served on the EU project Trace a number of years ago. That's how I got started in traceability, was as part of that. That was in the times when the word traceability was not a politically correct word in the United States. And in fact, government officials and so forth were not allowed to participate in those things. And it was very interesting being the only American in this study project. And I learned very quickly that although a lot of people wanted traceability, it really couldn't be done completely, even with simple materials like mineral water or honey or something like that. It was a very interesting thing. Let me talk a little bit about how the United States market works and how traceability at this point fits in. There's only one regulation that actually requires traceability in a certain setting, and that's our bioterror regulations that came up as a result of the 9/11 thing. And the owner, the handler of food, grain, whatever, is required to have record of where the food came from and where the food went to, one up, one down. That is only if there is a bioterror concern that would cause the regulations to be implemented. And so far as I know, that has never been tested in actual practice in a grain situation. The traceability, the pressure for traceability is coming almost exclusively through the market in the United States. Business reasons of various sorts, brand protection, consumers wanting food safety, consumers wanting to know where their food came from, et cetera, but business reasons that are not driven by rule. Food safety is probably the main driver of the discussion of traceability, and indeed mycotoxins are the top issue in the United States in grains as well. We have a new law, Food Safety Modernization Act, but it's not really a regulation. It is an audit requirement. The handlers of product have to assess what the hazards are in their own operation, and to the satisfaction of the inspector, demonstrate that they have good agricultural practices or standard operating procedures or whatever in place to mitigate those hazards. It's not a checklist rule-based situation. Furthermore, farmers, and this is almost inevitably in U.S. farm regulations, farmers are exempt. The traceability rules, or the Food Safety Modernization Act rules, don't extend to the farmer. And at the moment, there's a hole in the middle of the grain handler, which is also exempt, because it is presumed the grain handler takes in grain, doesn't change it, just packages it or stores it and prepares it for someone else. And politically, the grain handling industry was able to sell that to the authors of the regulation, and so the food safety rules don't apply as intensively. That's the situation in the United States. It is a business-based, business-driven practice, traceability. That is, what traceability is done is driven by some business need. Typically, a grain handler does not deliberately set out to trace grain from where it came from, the farmer, through to the next step. Typically, grain is commingled and blended, and the tracking is done only on the large scale of whatever the silo size is. Simple steps do work. We've done mock recalls on grain, and simple steps do work to some extent. Traceability is a variable art. The question that faces anyone in traceability is, how specific do you want to get? How precise do you want to get? And the more precise you want to get, the more you are driven to specific marketing networks. I'm primarily involved with the commodity industry. So that's that in that industry in the United States, bulk grains get quickly into large lots where the identity is obscure, if not known. We've done traceability tests, and like Mr. Adams, it becomes a backwards elimination of where it can't have been rather than where a particular lot was. And generally, you get to 3 to 10 possible sources, and that's basically where the traceability chain ends in our bulk industry. Most of the time, the traits required in traceability are not easily measurable. Mycotoxins are marginally so. GMO is less so. And pesticide residue, as an example, probably not at all. I'm not saying the United States is struggling. It's just that we don't face the consumer pressure and demand, and which would have to be coupled by payment by the consumer. At least in the United States, it would. Much less so, perhaps in other countries that are more regulation driven. But we ramp up our system based on the consumer demand and the willingness to pay. I would say that the carbon counting is increasingly consideration of traceability, because buyers of grain getting a carbon credit for reducing the environmental pollution, buyers of the grain are increasingly asking us to prove that the grain they bought was in fact the grain that got the credit, not just pooled in with all grains and half the grain got a credit, so half of everybody's grain got a credit. But the specific grain the farmer did something, or the handler did something that saved carbon inputs. That, in my opinion, that is going to be eventually the driver for traceability, but it is typically coming with money. Farmers are paid for doing things that reduce carbon inputs, as are other entities along the way, because the end user companies want to be able to say their product is green. And people are paying large money, relatively large anyways, percentage-wise, to buy green products. Traceability, I think, will come through that pathway rather than in the US, rather than regulatory requirements. The food safety laws and so forth have standards. They are not checklist style regulatory requirements. And enforcement comes when a problem is detected, not necessarily everyday checking or monitoring or whatever. So I guess if I would sum up, the United States is ramping up its capability for tracking things anywhere in markets, not just food or grain or whatever. Technology is enabling that, large databases and so forth. Technology is simplifying that. It's always a case of what precision does the consumer want for what the price would cost to get it. I had a question somewhere about partial traceability. All traceability is partial. It's never perfect. The only way it's perfect is you have a one-to-one system. I grow a vegetable in my yard and take it to a farmer's market. That's one-to-one. Beyond that, it becomes a matter of probability and odds of some kind, and the traceability becomes partial. You have to have a clear objective or a clear statement of the objective of tracking systems before it works at all. Our natural system that exempts the farmer from most of the regulations and standards that we do have probably doesn't create a lot of strength at the source level where most of the food safety problems occur. Most food safety problems come from the field, not all, but most. So we have some gaps in our system, but those gaps are there because of the massive amounts of grain that we handle. I'm sorry, I'm in bushels. For those of you in the UK, I think you can handle bushels, but we're about to raise 15 billion bushels of corn this year, harvested just shortly. That can't be handled separately. It has to be handled in bulk and commingled. And so the traceability is limited mathematically to how much you can keep documentation together and keep it into the system, keep it through the system. At the moment, that's, I would say, marginal at best. As the consumer is willing to pay for certain attributes that matter to them, we will get better and we will get more demanding throughout.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to ask you to mention to the audience, in our preparational meeting, you said something about, where's the demand is something like 90% accurate. As you said, it's not the exact science. We will never get to 100. But where do you think is a reasonable percentage that you think the grain sector specifically will be able to meet this demand of traceability? You mentioned the percentage. Are you willing to share that with us again?
Well, sure. I think we can get to somewhere in the 80-20 area in terms of where did the grain come from. It depends on, if you just want chain of custody, nothing else, just who had the grain when, we will be able to do a fairly good job of counting whose grain is in what shipment. Not where, not which lot, not which load, but whose grain in what shipment. I think we will get to a reasonable level. When a food safety trait is involved, it depends on whether your tolerance is very small or large. That's where zero tolerance comes in. Many consumers like to talk about zero tolerance for something. Zero doesn't exist. And the closer you try to get to zero, the more expensive and the more difficult it will become to track anything.
One of the expertise talking about it, and I assumed you're picking up that there's a difference between what's happening in the UK, what is happening in the US, but I think those are all things that is going to help us a lot. So I'm going to try to bring David back into it again. David, apparently you've got a better line now. And from the notes that you've sent me, we've lost you when you started talking about your third point, which you've sent through to me. So I don't know whether you can pick up from where you started about the regulatory obligations and the records that the farmers need to keep. I think this is where we lost you if I look at your notes. So David, are you there?
Oui. Je vous entends bien, merci. Donc,
I hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
oui, c'est très bien. Okay, merci.
Thank you very much.
J'arrivais sur le sujet de la traçabilité.
I was talking about the subject of traceability, and thereby I wanted to indicate that there's a regulatory obligation of registering the practices by the producers. This is an obligation which is checked by the government. Producers are bound to register all the various operations they carry out during the production of grains and oilseeds. This, of course, relates to the use of pesticides and also the hydrogen doses that are used per hectare. So, as a stocker, the grain collectors have created a number of bodies which are also have a certain obligation in terms of traceability from the beginning all the way up to the end of the product. The limitation were mentioned by Charles relating to bulk grain, which whereby products are mixed up during storage. There is also a requirement for traceability all the way along the chain. It's quite clear that the producer and the storage operator must, of course, carry out this operation, and this is not at the cost of the customer. The customer will have to pay the bill for complementary activities. Hence, in France, there are a number of burgeoning sectors, which I would refer to as the farm-to-fork sectors. In this regard, we asked a number of details on agricultural practices of the grain producers so that this information can be sent to the client. We can take the example of beer, which is bottled. On these bottles, you'll find that there is a QR code. So by scanning this QR code with a telephone, you'll find information on the origin of the grains and the whole lifespan of the cereals from the production to the processing by the brewery. This is what we normally refer to as the blockchain. This is the end-to-end traceability that covers the entire lifespan of the grain. There is another subsector which relates to the production of oilseed, which is used, of course, for animal feed. Animals that are fed with these products, of course, they produce eggs and meat that is rich in omega-3. Again, in this regard, we require to have full traceability from the farm all the way up to the final product. So these traceability requirements, which are becoming more and more stronger, are also linked to the digital resources, which are really booming in our country. For a number of years, we have been detecting a variety of produce from the farmers through photographs which are taken by farmers all the way from the farm to the silo. So this is based on a mobile application that enable us to identify varieties, and we hope that in the near future we should be able to identify the protein content in barley, and also to identify the mycotoxins, and also to be able to detect the presence of pesticides and other chemical products. To conclude, I would like to dwell on the subject of pesticides. As explained by Paul earlier, increasingly we have more and more requirements in terms of regulatory compliance relating to the presence of pesticide in grain. Of course, these standards are developing more and more as and when capacity and technology develops. And I think we are more and more in position to find molecules of pesticides, in fact, at a very low level, so we can find trace elements of this. This is not always linked to the application of pesticides on the product itself. This, of course, could be the result of cross-contamination, as we call it in France. You may have applied a pesticide on a grain, and the grain is taken to a silo, and then when we bring another batch of grain in a silo, then you get some kind of a contamination as a result of contact with the walls of the silo. This is something we've already experienced in France. I wanted to point out that the technological and analytical tools that we have at our disposal are more and more efficient. And we hope that we should be able to detect all molecules of pesticide in any product, even when the farmer or the producer will not have used those pesticides on the grain. This, of course, pollution could also be the result from other fields. A number of years, we collected a number of sunflower seed, which contained traces of pesticide, which are not used on sunflower, but it could have come from neighboring farms and thereby polluted the crop, which had not received that kind of pesticide directly. That is the situation. So, as far as the pesticides are concerned in France, we're trying to respond to the needs and expectations of the consumers and the determination of the government to protect the population from the contamination by pesticides. There is, however, a threshold that can be accepted in terms of residues. I think I'll conclude on that note, and I think you heard me loud and clear this time around. Thank you very much.
Merci, David. I think, thank you very much. And don't let the language barrier prevent you from hearing what are they struggling with and what they've done already. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned that we can apply in South Africa. Also, I think it's the first time I heard about, looking what is on the inside of your silo walls, Casper. Ek weet nie of julle al aan sulke goed begin dink het, but that was quite interesting. And then also, I don't know if you've picked up there that the customers who can scan the what is a barcode on the bottle of beer. You know, if they get it right, they can actually establish where the barley is coming from. It sounds quite advanced already as far as that's concerned. So these are all things that we can learn from. So thank you very much, David, for sharing the French experience with us. I'm going to ask now our South African silo operator to share with us, you know, maybe help us defining where we are and what are we doing. And I don't think we need to go in all the details, but I think there's a lot of discussion in industry about a grain passport or having a chemical passport, similar to what we've seen in some of the industries. I think the barley and the canola was the ones who started off with that first. Probably because it's single buyers. That might be the reason for that. But I think, Casper, just from a South African perspective on traceability, where are we, what are we doing, and what are the challenges?
Yes, so thanks, Yanni. Today I represent the Agbiz grain members and not myself specifically. So if you look at a South African viewpoint, we're in baby steps when it comes to traceability. I think some people are way ahead, some people are way behind, and it's maybe an opportunity currently that a regulatory requirement. I think today is specifically there to understand what the rest of the world is doing regarding traceability, and as you heard from David and Charles, it's not exact science. You'll have to go back and determine what is traceability, what do we need in South Africa to trace. And then we need to go back and say, listen, is this possible? Can we test the risk? Can we mitigate the risk? Can we trace the risk through our systems and our grain elevators and our bins to determine what's going where at the end of the day and maybe trace it back? I think we must be clear on forward traceability and backward traceability. It doesn't help if we have traceability, but then there's a detective work that needs to start and trace the whole system back to where it came from. So yeah, to sum it up, our traceability in South Africa is currently baby steps. I think as industries we need to come together to understand what we want, and then we need to implement that. And I think as storage operators we must remember we service the market, and if the market wants a specific service, we need to come together and create that service to service our free market.
Thank you, Casper. What I've picked up is that the demands from the consumers are out there, you know, whether we're ready or not. And there was a Umfani Ferreira, he owned the bakery in Naboomspruit. Wat is hulle vandag? You know, anyway, so Umfani, when we deregulated, to say a chain gets pulled, not pushed. It doesn't work when you push a chain. So the consumer must pull, and then all these sort of different role players in the chain must fall in line with it. But the consumers are asking these things, and I've also received a very good question from one of the online viewers, but I'll share with that at the moment. But I think for us, the biggest thing is, yes, we can probably test MRLs at the silo, but what about the queues? You know, we spoke about, you know, there's not enough investment in the silo industry at the moment. Now, you can just imagine if a farmer is like 2 or 3 days in a queue just because somebody is testing all the cargoes in front of his truck or his tractor for like residues and all these sort of things. Tom, you're maybe going to fill half your silos. It's going to be very difficult. And I'm going to ask, before we ask Francois to come on, Viana, just from an equipment point of view and testing point of view, she's the manager of our grains laboratory here in the building. If you can just give her a mic maybe. Are there new equipment coming, and are they coming faster or becoming faster in testing and accurate enough that we can offload quickly enough, but also have assurance what is the sort of the chemical residues on the grains?
Yeah, thank you, Yanni. I think there's the equipment and the technology is changing in leaps and bounds. And I mean the people providing the equipment sitting in the room. And we see the new advancements. What we have to keep in mind is, yes, we can do it quicker. There are technology available to test it a little bit quicker. But we also have to understand that there's costs associated with that. Those equipment, there's fantastic equipment available, but it comes at a cost. And we all have to look at the balance, and I think that is one thing that Charles said is we also have to remember what's practically doable, and we will never get to a stage where we have 100%, but we, as Casper also said, it's baby steps, and but technology, to answer your question, yes, it's available and it comes in leaps and bounds, but it comes at a price.
Okay, it's too slow and too costly, that's what you're saying. All right, so there's quite a challenge. I also heard the word, have we got the research capacity to meet this sort of demands? Are we having like postgraduate students currently doing MSCs and PhDs on these matters to help the industry to go to get out of the baby steps? So we've got about 10 minutes before we want to make a break, and I'm going to ask Francois Koekemoer, Dr. Francois Koekemoer from Syngenta, to just from a seed breeding point of view, and they're also selling crop protection chemicals. Francois, just your perspective, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Yanni. Yeah, I think I would like to have more a view on not looking at the chemicals and pesticides that we're confronted with, or mycotoxins, but more an identity-preserved situation as for us going forward. I mean, if you look at South Africa at the moment, we have what we call a informal list for our cultivars that we need to go through a release process. You have also been part of that process for many years. South Africa developed and invested specifically for the breeding programs. That's been a long time in South Africa, cultivars. That is really good in milling quality, especially comparable to, I mean, a lot of the international standards in Canada and Australia. If you look at the dough quality varieties, it's very unique in elasticity and extensibility of your varieties, that we can really bake good breads at a very lower protein content. And I think that's an investment that is a product that, you know, is adopted or required by our milling and baking industry in South Africa. And I think also with the endpoint royalty that was being implemented to kind of, I would say, support or improve the financial means for companies working with self-fertilized crops, has been a really good step in the right direction, and also attracted, I think, a lot of new role players that's one of developing new varieties to also try to capitalize and get some feedback or return on investment on the endpoint royalty. And I think, although this is a list that is informalist, I think it is also important to understand, I mean, it takes a time. I mean, it's been 30 years that I've been involved as a wheat breeder, and we have developed, I mean, over time, varieties that's good in yields, but also good in milling and baking quality. And I think if you rely on, as a company, just looking at introductions either from wherever in the world, in Europe or South America or wherever, that those varieties are developed for a specific reason for those countries, for their milling requirements, not necessarily, you know, would be adopted or really be suited for South African conditions. And I think you most probably will have to invest in having a local breeding program, developing varieties and making crosses between South African germplasm and other role of other cultivars from other parts of the world to you know, develop material that would be suited for the South African market. So I think most probably it could happen, you know, that farmers could, I mean, there's lots of trials planted through the country at the moment, strict trials of these varieties. They could have good yields, but most probably then sometimes not the right quality, and could be ending up in the silos. I mean, at the moment, it's not a really clear system that we try to identify the varieties up front, but the same system that we don't test that or confirm that afterwards always. But it could end up that these type of cultivars can end up in a silo and have poor quality, and then also was probably a product that our silo owners now can sell back to the millers and the bakers. And I think that I just would like, from my side, highlight that there could be a risk in this regard, and it's something that we maybe need to discuss and see how we can address that, if that is really a getting risk going forward.
Right, thank you very much. There you've heard about quality, traceability and preservation from a cultivar point of view. So this was a development that South Africa did quite a while ago, and it is helping our processing sector a lot, and that is just to try and do almost the traceability thing before you start planting it, to have a list of cultivars that already meets the needs of those who are planting it and producing it and also processing it specifically. So there you've got a sort of a spectrum of this animal, or called traceability. What I think, when you use the words, Casper, of small baby steps where we are currently, I think for the leaders in the sector, there's a huge decision that we actually have to make, to whether we're going to regulate this thing or whether we're going to self-regulate this thing. And there's some examples. If you regulate, you must have an inspection. And you've heard what Charles was saying, is they don't necessarily monitor all the time, but they only move in when there are problems. But there's a lot in this industry of self-regulation, which we actually have done very successfully. When we deregulated in '97, we said, we want to go to a free market, and we said, Suffolk will provide that facility, and the JSE took over the company, and they provide that service there. We said we will need information, and the government said to us they don't have the capacity, don't have the money to do that, so we've registered SAGAS. And SAGAS is providing all our information today. And we went to the government and asked for a regulation to have the information. We said we need to monitor the quality of our crops, and there wasn't a laboratory available, so we formed our own grains laboratory. It's in this building, and we're now monitoring the crop. We're getting the samples from all over the country, and we publish that so that everybody can see their food is good. And when the governments stopped to monitor the imports of grains, we started to collect samples there, send it to the laboratory, and publish that as well, so that we can show to our consumers that the stuff is of good quality. And have we done enough in terms of the safety? Maybe not, because we are very much sort of the season behind, one season behind. We don't publish the numbers the moment the ship docks in Durban or wherever. So there's a lot of things that we've achieved so far, and I think for the leadership in the grain silo industry, for the producers and the processors, the traders, it seems like we're at the juncture where we actually have to make a decision on, are we going to go a self-regulatory system and grow enough confidence with the consumers that we're actually doing a good job, because there's also some concerns on the government side. But I mean, the PPCB is still doing a good job for us to make sure that all the product that we're exporting is meeting the requirements. South Africa is being established as a reliable source. We haven't had any recalls on that. So, but it would be very bad. This is something that you would probably want to prevent very specifically. So, Casper, you want to make
sorry, Jan, I just want to add there. There's a good voluntary compliance in our sector. Producers comply to certain standards voluntarily. They say, listen, we did not use specific pesticides or unsafe pesticides. The storage operators have a food and health safety conduct in their contracts to say, listen, we don't use illegal stuff. And through the whole sector, there's a good compliance. And I think it's not being audited, but at least we try to do the right thing. We just need to take the next step and add traceability to that.
Yep. So the documentation is a big thing, to keep records. I don't know, whether the cloud's got enough space to keep all this information that that you have to keep. I heard David talking about the people taking photos while they delivering their stuff, or pictures of their fields and things like that. Those are new things that we need to teach the market role players, and there might be opportunities for companies to provide some services around that to help us with the traceability. So after the break, we're gonna try and answer. There's a question about a recall, and if you get to the farmer with a problem, can he actually handle this sort of recall cost that is involved? Because now it's not just your own cost, it's also contamination for other people that might have losses. So there was a question around that. So for those who got the answer on that, please think about it. And then, David, there's a specific question towards you to try and just explain to us about the cost sharing between government on the one hand and the different sectors, the farmers and the operators, the traders on the other hand. Is there a way that you get some support from your government, or is it, and how do you decide who is doing or paying what part of the traceability cost? I think it is a big challenge for us, how we're going to deal with that. And then there's a question, what do we want to trace exactly in South Africa? And I think this is a very good question. Is it only a single chemical like glyphosate that we want to check, or is it more? I think we've got some answers for that. That specific question, will it limit the cost compared to a full traceability thing? Now, when I joined the industry in 1985, there was a miller, when we started talking about deregulating the market, and he said, well, we must go for 100%, and we were all scared because we didn't know it. And we asked him, now, what is your motivation for that? And he said, you can't be half pregnant. So I think with traceability, we're going to see if we can do a partly traceability thing, whether it will be sufficient. To exempt the farmers, I think might not necessarily be the solution, although I think the farmers will probably like something like that. We've got 15 minutes for a break. Please grab a cup of coffee, but please also talk to somebody that you don't necessarily know so well. There will be time to talk to your colleagues again when you're back at the office. I always told my staff, please mingle with the farmers and not with each other when you're at tea time. So let's take a 50-minute break, and then we'll come back, start answering some of the questions, and see if we can add more content to the discussion. Thank you very much. Welcome back. We're still busy trying to find out what exactly is traceability, and especially in the grain sector. This is quite a challenge, and I really enjoyed the discussions and everybody asking questions during tea time. And thank you for the questions that we've received online. Some of you have put your names to it, but we will appreciate if you can put some more questions. I've also heard somebody say to me, but Jannie, is this not going to become a new technical barrier to trade? And yes, I think it would be. I think the European Union also indicated to us in the Green Deal what are the things that suppliers need to comply with if you want to supply the EU. And the export industries are already working on a lot of those things. Some of it's quite easier, like maybe in citrus and meat and those sort of things. But grains, we've got some challenges. So the first question I'm going to put to Casper quickly, and that is about, if you withdraw, or you have to withdraw or recall a bin, and you find out who's the farmer, like in the example that Paul mentioned in the UK, will he be insured? Will his balance sheet be able to carry it? What is the bank going to say? Because they think they've got his farm as security for doing the production loan. So Casper, what is the short answer on that one?
Depends on the producer. Maybe if it's big enough to cover that, well done. But in general, I think it's a big burden to put onto a producer. I'm unsure if there's an insurance product currently that will cover a producer against a big recall like that. Tomorrow is about insurability in the grain storage. So I think it's maybe a good question to ask tomorrow as well. But yeah, I think to recall a whole bin is a massive burden on a producer. And I would like to add to that, to determine which producer it is maybe difficult. You can maybe pinpoint it to 4, 5, or 6 producers, and maybe they can share the burden then. But I think it's a question rather for tomorrow than today.
Okay, but what are you currently doing as a silo operator to make sure that you know who's actually? Do you have the records of who's delivering a particular bin?
Yeah, currently, I think 90% of the silos know exactly who's the farmers that delivered to the specific silo. Let's say 80% accurate on whose product is in which bin or in which bag. And I think with a bit of more work, we can actually determine from which field the specific load comes from, and then maybe tie it back to a bin. Again, do we need all that info, and who do we give it to? Can we give it to someone down the line? What they're going to do with it? There's numerous questions following this one.
And nobody has asked something about the Poppy Act. Says, are you allowed to do all these things? I think these are the challenges. What the benefit that we have is, since we deregulated, we have got a quality crop sample that we get from all the silo owners and from all the imports, and we've got a database since then on a lot of these issues. Now, we haven't, that was mostly grading, and later on we started with the mycotoxins. So I think if you drill down, and this is where the AI people can help us a lot, is to, with artificial intelligence, look at where are the spots, and if you overlay it with your climatic conditions that influence that a lot, you can actually establish where in South Africa that you need to do like more tests. I think Tom was saying over tea, he might have to do like every second load when he's in an area like that. But if you're in an area where there's actually no proof or evidence in the last 20 years of mycotoxin presence, it might be needed only to do once or twice, 2 or 3 loads just to make sure about that. So there's ways to eliminate your risk. But again, it is like I said, who wants to know what? If it is regulatory and the government is involved, then you're going to do everything. And it might probably cost you a lot more. If you do it on a self-regulatory basis, you're going to have to build confidence with your consumers. Ferdi, thank you also for your question about, and Ferdi, Dr. Ferdi Meyer, or Professor, he just responded by saying, there's already a lot of information out there. The silo people are doing some documentation on it, and like Casper just shared with us. So I want to ask David, if you can maybe come online and just explain to us, what is your experience around the costing? Who's bearing the cost? And do you get any assistance from your government to actually make sure that you can meet these traceability requirements? That is regulatory, and obviously, I think from your presentation, we've heard if it is a requirement from a specific customer, then obviously the customer have to pay for this thing. And then I want to ask you as well, what is the physical data that the farmers in France have to keep to deliver at your silos? What is the physical things that they have to keep? So David, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think I can explain in a few words who supports the costs, who bears the costs. And I will take the example of something that happened to us last year. As I said, the producer is responsible for documenting all their practices. This is regulatory. They do not receive any assistance from the government for that purpose. However, as you know, Europe, through its common agricultural policy, subsidizes agricultural production in European countries, and to that effect, producers receive some assistance from the European Union. The lack of respect, of implementation of such regulations is the cause for some producers not benefiting from such support. So there are services that exist from the French government which are given to producers, and when such producers do not respect traceability and compliance regulations, especially as regards pesticides, and for example, the use of a certain product, such as, for example, nitrogen, in that case, they do not benefit from any support from the French government. Now, as regards the market, we have some clients who request us to produce, together with the seed that they receive, all practices that took place throughout the production process. In this regard, we're going to distinguish two types of markets. The export market, where very often the traceability requirement is often related to regulatory requirements only, and we also have the more specific and the smaller type of market. When I say small, I'm talking about the volume of seeds, and such markets can ask us to produce more traceability information. As an example, we'll give, for example, the example of markets that are focused on production. And in that case, we need information from the producers so that we can receive the various subsidies that we will benefit. And then in that case, the consumer will get the information related to the origin of the product as well as to the value of the product. And we also have, in addition to such markets, another type of market which is focused on traceability requirements. Here, traceability is regulatory, in which case nobody pays for it, or it could also be supplementary, which means that we have to do it in addition to the regulation, and in that case, consumers will pay for it. I will take one example to finish my answer. Last year, we had, for example, a sunflower ship that came through. It was loaded with sunflower seeds. It was sent to the client. The client conducted an analysis of pesticides residues, and they found a type of pesticide that was not authorized on sunflower seeds. Thanks to our exchanges with that client, we were able to recall the cargo, following which we sent it back to our silos for further processing. But unfortunately, we were unable to find the farmer who was originally responsible for that contamination. And so, when you have such cases, either you are insured and you have an insurance that is going to pay for the costs that you've already borne through the production process, or alternatively, you will have to bear the cost without being able to charge the producer for those. So traceability remains something that is a little bit difficult to fully attain in France, even though we have already made a lot of progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I think what you've heard is that their subsidy program is actually assisting a lot with getting data from the farmers because they get refunded from it. And in this country, you're going to find it difficult to get the same type of cooperation. I want to ask about the burden of proof, and I want to ask Paul and Charles maybe to give us some indication from your side is where is the burden of proof when it comes to a default? Can you just maybe share some of the experiences with you, and what is your systems, your current systems learned you about who should prove what? Paul, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I think the reality is in initially the burden of proof is down to who has supplied that material. So initially, in terms of storage, that's going to be the storekeeper, because he's the supplier, he's the one that's got the contract with the end user. But as David was just saying just now, you know, the originality comes back down to the farm. The farm is responsible for producing safe crops. So if you're unable to trace that, then the burden of proof just sits with the store. I think in a lot of cases, from what I've been hearing today, I think we're sort of missing the point maybe. And traceability procedures should be in place. They should be able to work. But in terms of who has that documentation and where does it go, well, it just sits with the store, because the reality is that those traceability procedures only need to be brought into action in the event of an issue, in the event of a problem and a potential recall situation. And at that point, those procedures have to come into play, and then you try and follow that through. So initially, it's a case of having those procedures in place that you hope you're never going to have to call on, but you might have to. And just to come back, I'd like to come back on Casper's point about self-regulation. And I have to say, in my experience, self-regulation just does not work. We know from experience, we send out questionnaires to growers, like a pre-screen questionnaire, and I guarantee that almost every one of them will come back saying, yes, we have these procedures in place, we do this, we do that, we do the other. And then you say, right, well, we're going to come and audit you, and you go out and audit them, and you discover that actually they've got virtually none of those things in place that they've told you they've had in place. And in terms of pesticide testing, if I go back a number of years within the produce certification schemes, initially growers were allowed to identify which pesticides they had used and have MRL testing done for those. But there were so many incidents of growers only telling you which pesticides they wanted you to know that they'd used. And when multi-screen testing came in, it very soon became apparent that there was a lot of stuff being used that they hadn't declared. So now multi-screen is the norm. So self-regulation doesn't work, and you have the regulations there, but really somebody needs to be checking up that these things are in place. We've done some work with growers, and we've discovered that many don't keep pesticide records, they don't have any storage practices, and we are all consumers, we are all eating this food. And I don't know about anybody else in the room or online, but when I go to the supermarket and buy food that I'm going to feed to my family, I sort of assume and take it for granted that this has been produced in a safe manner and that I'm not going to get any harm from this food. And I think the onus is on the industry to be able to demonstrate and prove that they are doing that. And certainly if I was still farming, which I haven't farmed for many years now, but if I was still farming, then I would want to make sure that I had procedures in place, maybe to prove that I was not the culprit, rather than proving that I wasn't, that I was, sorry. So for me, the cereals industry is decades behind the produce industry in terms of certification and due diligence. And we've got a long way in cereals to catch up.
There you've got it straight, and no doubt what he meant. Charles, can we move over to you? Can you contribute in any way in terms of the burden of proof?
Yeah, well, at least I'll take a shot at this question. In the United States, I think the government does surveys and so forth, and of food products, including grains. And in general, they find that the level of contamination, if you will, of various things, including mycotoxins, is generally below the tolerance level that is set for marketing. And that the presence of a tolerance is a crucial step in this whole traceability chain, because if the average of your grain coming from the farm is well below the tolerance, or is at a non-detect level, then there's really no need, at least the market feels, that there's no need for exhaustive testing and sampling and so forth. And I think that's where the distinction comes in as to how much of a problem is actually there. You can test and find something at times, but how much of a problem is actually there. And that's the way that I think the US system works with this. Every once in a while, there is a problem. The cattle manure in the wheat that contaminated the General Mills, I think it was, bin in Kansas City and things like that. It happens every once in a while. And quite frankly, the legal system becomes the arbiter, because very instantaneously there will be a lawsuit of some kind if there's a big problem that costs a lot of money to change hands. And frankly, with our system of not involving the farmer in various legal liabilities in particularly food safety issues, it becomes sort of a game of musical chairs. And who ends up holding the bag for the evidence that there was a problem? Fortunately, at least up to now, the assumption, and I think a valid assumption, has been that we don't have constant problems of this sort. They're one-off situations in unusual cases and so forth, and are treated that way, rather than impressing a testing system on everyone that will simply prove the statement, well, there's very little of that, or there's very little of this. And I would like to make a comment on the testing technology and the rapid testing technology. To use aflatoxin. Aflatoxin testing has gone down from probably 20 minutes to 5 if you use the lateral flow strip tests and so forth. 5 is still a huge, 5 minutes a test is still a huge length of time when you have to dump a truck every minute. And so fast is in the eye of the beholder. And I think we need to keep that in mind because of the volumes of grain. In a specialty market, 5 may be fine. In an export market where the government has time to test lots of grain, 5 minutes is fine. In a farm market where the farmer will be very upset in various ways if they have to wait an extra 30 seconds or whatever it is on the weighbridge, not so much. I think we have to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Charles. Can I ask you, whilst you're online, it is easy to say, there's the US legislation excludes the farmers and the silo industry at the moment, but what about the exports? If your exporter is requiring, that from which farms the product is coming from, do you have something in the US in place for something like that?
That would be a market condition that would go on the export tender and would, to whatever extent is possible, that would be factored into the tender offer to the customer, the cost of doing that. At this point, the export market, at least in the United States, is a price-driven market. And so $1 or $2 a ton will take you out of a tender. And so you don't, that would be done contractually, and it's not done to any great extent in the commodity market. In the food and specialty markets, yes.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there's a specific question in the audience that you want to put. There's one, Willie.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Charles. I want to ask a question to you. Just before the question, just what I see is the words low cost, premium price, and then capacity comes to mind. And just something that I learned from yesterday is that the market will sort itself out between the consumer and the producer. So the question, or Dr. Charles, first of all, I like that question you ask, how much of a problem is there? And I want to answer that question with another question. How big is the agenda behind it? So just a question about the carbon reduction. From a farmer's point of view, what will the difference be between a carbon better or carbon friendly farm and on the grain or cereal, like you put it, be? If you can just show us the difference, if you can. Thank you.
Okay, Charles, did you?
I'll take a try at this. Most of the carbon market strategies in the U.S. Pay the farmer by the acre. This farmer signs up for this program, and then they will do certain things: plant cover crops, use nitrogen stabilization in their fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera. They'll do things, and they will get paid for the carbon credits by some brokerage firm that then passes those credits to a user firm. The user firm would be somebody that wants to advertise they're going green, as an example. I could use some company names, but I'd better not. But that's how it works. The typical premium payment to the farmer would be less than $50 an acre, sometimes much less than $50 an acre. And I know the units are getting in the way here a little bit, but an acre would be, there's 2.5 acres in a hectare, and there's about 2.2 pounds in pounds in a kilogram. So, or kilograms in the pound. So it kind of works out, the numbers about the same in dollars per hectare. That is enough to entice early adopters to try it. The experience has been the paperwork burden of keeping track of everything is probably, for those who like computers and data and so forth, not so much for those who like to drive tractors and get high yields, maybe more.
I just want to ask a question in the grain industry in the whole. Can there be a comparison between one farm and the farm next to that? Can you show us a practical example of a farm that has better carbon traceability than what they do? What the practical difference will be, please?
What you're asking there is there a system of benchmarking that a producer could use to compare their farm with someone else's? So far, I would say that doesn't exist. The land-grant universities compile production costs and input costs and so forth, but for something that would be related to traceability and more specialized than just general production input and output costs, then at this point, there's not a very good system of benchmarking what, for example, I might get on my farm with my neighbor. There isn't. And data management, data security is a big discussion in farm circles these days. Who owns the data? Who gets to see it? And that's a lively debate. Who owns the data? And there are a number of strategies kind of coming together on how to configure a data repository that would allow you to do that. But so far, I would say there isn't one from a practical point of view.
Thank you very much, Charles. Can I just ask the other two speakers, Paul and David, if you've got a comment on this? And then I want to pass the ball to Francois. Can you breed us, products, maize and wheat that automatically qualify for traceability in carbon? Paul, any contribution from your side on this carbon thing?
I have to say the carbon is not really my area of expertise. I'm much more on the food safety side. But look, if the carbon credits and the environmental aspects help drive traceability that improves the food safety side of things, then I'm 100% behind
that. Anything from your side?
Yanni, yeah, I think it would be really difficult in that sense. I hope we can improve plants to absorb more carbon dioxide and improve yields. But I think getting that is quite a difficult task, which most probably will definitely not be possible.
I think one of the fertilizer companies indicate to us, how they can reduce the number of pesticides that by doing it on precision farming methods. And I think what we're looking at is, what is the future to decrease the fertilizer? Because this is part of what the European Union, I think, in the Green Deal is hinting to us, that we should actually produce the same crop or even more with less fertilizer. Now, from a price point of view, that would be fantastic, but have you got any indication, from a plant growth perspective of where we are with that?
Is the question referred to myself, Yanni?
Yes, Francois? Dr. Francois Koekemoer?
Yeah, I think there's definitely challenges where we are looking at reducing nitrogen usage of plants. I mean, there is at the moment some technologies and germplasm that we can use. For instance, biological products that Syngenta can also add on seed. That can also be used, to, I think, slow down the change of certain, from ammonium forms to nitrate forms, and that you can actually get an improved absorbability of your nitrogen. So there's various projects going within Syngenta, for instance, that is most probably will be rolling out in the next 5 to 10 years, that I think is quite exciting for our producers. And then also we are looking also at there's a really nice wheat material that's been developed by Summit in Mexico. That is what they call biological nitrification inhibitors. So that is, germplasm that actually slows down the change of nitrogen of the ammonium form into nitrate form. Actually improve also then the uptake of those nitrogen to increase your yields, and so most probably can cut down a huge or significant percentage of your nitrogen applications to get the same yield and same protein content in wheat. So there is definitely exciting technology that's been developed that could definitely will play a big role going forward.
Thank you very much. It will pay you to make sure that you understand where we are with the scientists and what they are currently doing and how they are developing. I've got a question from Jaap Steinman that I think I want to pose to you, Casper, and he's asking about where are we in South Africa with our the chemical passport system. I don't know if there's somebody in the audience. I saw Corneille has left. But have you got some information for us? Where are we, and do you think it's going to be viable?
I think it's viable. I think it's not 100% in place currently. Mm-hmm. It's easier when it's one off-taker and one commodity to get a passport system in place and pull it through from producer to off-taker. As long as the storage operator knows there's a contract with the off-taker, it's easier to implement that. But currently in South Africa, we're sitting with a lot of sit with instances where the storage operator is not the owner of the stock. So someone is getting delivery on Safex, and the stock is being taken to a mill, and the storage operator is not even sure where it goes to. And to implement a passport system, chemical passport system, whatever passport system in a system like that is very difficult. But yeah, if it's one-to-one or from producer to off-taker, a couple producers to off-takers, then it's easier to implement it. And I think there's very good work currently, especially in canola and the barley field, with the passport system. But again, in grains with maize and soyas, it's very difficult.
And I think the challenge that I've heard, I can't remember which speaker said, you know, the farmer will say, yes, yes, everything is in place. And then my question is, you know, who's going to monitor this, whether it actually is yes, yes, yes? Because the farmer might say, you know, I've used these 3 chemicals on my crop when I deliver it on my passport system to you as the storer. But who's checking whether that is actually correct? I think today we are almost like having a voluntary system when it comes to our soya statutory levy to say, you know, which varieties have you planted, because they distribute the funding from the statutory levy according to those sort of data. I mean, they use other methods as well. But how would you as a storer go about if a farmer comes to you and he said, line it off, well, line it off. You know, have you done this? Yes, 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 yes. You know, here's your paper.
I can answer you the question to say, let's say a farmer comes with a load and you test it with all mycotoxins and everything, and it's being rejected. What's happening to that load? Is it going back to the farm, coming back with small quantities back in loads where you can't pick it up? Or do you need to offload it and put it aside? So it's difficult, and I don't have the answers for all of these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm not here to answer all the questions that you are asking. You're supposed to help us understand here. No? So the thing was, I mean, we've you know, rejected a certain ship that was discharged or supposed to be discharged in Durban, and there were some issues around the quality of the thing and some food safety issues. And up to today, nobody knows what happened to it. You know, it wasn't definitely not thrown into the sea. So it is true now, if we reject it at the silo, you know, what is going to happen to this? And I think, you know, in some animals, my understanding is that they are more sensitive to some of these mycotoxins even than humans for that matter. So it is not so easy. I've got a very interesting question from somebody asking what are actually the benefits, I'm freely translating here, what benefits are there for the value chain to have traceability other than the consumers? This is a tough one. Building an image. I don't know if one of the international people can help us with this question. So what are the other benefits of traceability in the value chain other than just the benefit of the consumer? Then are there supposed to be other benefits? Huh? Any from the international guests? Anyone who want to give a shot onto this? You see, this is now difficult with not body language and not having cameras on here. Paul, where are you?
Yeah, I can.
Come.
So, in terms of due diligence and good agricultural practice schemes, there are benefits to the farmers, because in many cases, being certified to those schemes has a dramatic effect on the food safety systems on farms. So in my experience of auditing and certifying red tractor schemes here in the UK over a sort of 15-year period, right from the start when the scheme first started back in 1998, you know, it was very, very clear over a number of years that there were huge improvements in the way that farmers stored their grains. And, you know, in a lot of cases, farmers spend all year growing their crop and then they put it in store and it gets forgotten about because they're busy starting to plant the new crop and do that. And then, oh my gosh, my grain in store isn't looking very good, or it's got damp, or it's moldy, or there are insects in it. And you know, in my experience, being certified to these schemes, although farmers hate them, let's be honest, we all hate being audited. Nobody likes that. they do actually have a big benefit in terms of how they're storing their crops, and that has an onward benefit to food safety and consumer what's the word I'm looking for? Consumer confidence in products that they're buying. So, and also have an effect on their bottom line, because if they're doing better grain storage and controlling mycotoxins through good agricultural practices in the field with disease control and rotation and variety selection and all of these things, then that will also have an effect on their bottom line.
There was a lady at the back who wants to ask a question. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Hi, actually building on the question that Casper actually asked or mentioned, is there sort of like a threshold level, if any, that warrants a recall when it comes to traceability? And what is the work, or how does the work look like in terms of traceability with the rest of the sub-Saharan countries relative to the rest of the world? Coming back to the point that Yanni mentioned with the research that is being done, is there any of that is done, and how does it look like? Thanks.
I'm glad. I'm not a panel member, but a facilitator. Let's start off, Casper, give it a shot.
Okay, so currently the grading system in South Africa is a sensory and a visual grading inspection. The test we do on mycotoxins and everything is not forced down, so it's voluntary that's being done. In SADC countries, they'll test for mycotoxins. At mills and everywhere, they'll test for I'm specifically referring to mycotoxins now because that's a example I can use. So if it's being tested and it can be traced back to the storer, the opposite storage operator, he'll actually assist to sort that out and find out where it happened. Mycotoxins is difficult because it's always present, but it's when it becomes toxic above certain levels, then it's an issue. So to go back to or to answer it completely, certain traceability issues is not being tested when grain is taken in, and it's not being tested when it's outloaded. It's a risk that we need to measure and mitigate to take responsibility for that at the end of the day, if that answers your
Let's just get, Viana, just explain to us quickly what is currently that we have to comply with in terms of these sort of mycotoxin stuff?
Yeah. Now, on the mycotoxin side, we do have regulations. It doesn't mean if you don't test every load that's coming in, there are regulations to your question then, when it is above the regulated level, you are obliged to do something about it. So yeah, there are regulations similar to what we have on pesticide residues, maximum residue limits. We also have those for certain mycotoxins.
So that's by the Department of Health for sanitary purposes, and I think there are thresholds. There are also, sort of in the international arena, you will find some guidelines on those things that are not regulated so that you can at least know what is dangerous levels and whatnot. And there's always I think Charles also mentioned something about a tolerance in some of those things. It's not like a exact thing, my understanding is that, but I don't have all the full details. Okay, there was another question here. Joshua?
So just to answer your question, the benefit for the consumer, I think in South Africa is work creation. And then just a thought for food regarding how we can do the traceability in South Africa. I'm coming out of the telecoms industry predominantly, and we used GIS to ascertain which areas we want to roll out. With information like Dr. Fadri has provided and analytics and all of that. If you look at the farmer is not going to be happy, but the farmer has all the equipment already in place for precision farming, especially commercial farmers, where you can adapt traceability by scanning all of that and put it in place that makes the life of the farmer easier. And that can be pulled through to the silo operator and from there through the production to the end customer. So the abilities is there. It's just to get everybody to work together, and I think the private sector will pull the chain to get that in place and get all the regulations in place, the policies as well as the regulation. We can do it. It's just we all need to work together to get to that point. The equipment is there and the technology is there.
Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, you will sense that I think you've used the words baby steps in the beginning, Casper, where we are. Now, I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, you know, we haven't even covered the subject matter from where I thought we should have been covering. And I want to be led by the questions that is posed. There's quite a few questions coming in, you know, especially for instance on the JSE, you know, when you take delivery, how do you know about the traceability of that? Because you've got specific requirements. Now you buy product and it gets delivered on the JSE. How, you know, that would probably, you know, yesterday we were having discussions about the minimum requirements and we haven't even touched on the traceability issues necessarily. Wessel, you want to make a contribution?
Well, Yanni, my question is, if you talk about the generic passport system and the implementation of that in South Africa, which is not more actually than a gentleman's agreement, which then, if Casper must receive product from a producer, you must actually tell the guys that don't comply to that agreement or the gentleman's agreement, they can't take it in. What will be the competition issue on that be? Because you can't actually refuse that farmer to deliver it, and then he deliver it in the silo amongst all the other stuff, and then traceability is gone. Isn't it better as an alternative to contract that traceability? So the process, a contract with the storage operator with specific producers that would like to be part of that, and then do it in that manner. Because to go for a gentleman's agreement and a generic passport system, I think you opens you up for all other kinds of risk, competition issues, not being able to take some producers' stock and others you can take, and then eventually there's a lot of disputes.
Thank you. They say leadership is a full contact sport. There's going to be blood and some of it is going to be yours. Now, Wessel is a leader in our sector and he's asking questions, how are we going to deal with this? But you're going to have to help and lead us and find solutions to these things. So if a voluntary system is not working, we have to test it and say it's not working. How are we going to do it? And I think in this country, we also got another challenge. If you regulate it and it's not policed, it means nothing. We've got, nobody is supposed to murder anybody in this country. I'm not going to quote the numbers of those sort of things now. So this is quite a big challenge. There's a lot more questions, I think, that needs to be debated around the subject matter. I really appreciated the inputs that we received from our international speakers, and I assume you're going to give them each a chance to just maybe summarize of what they think. So I want to thank you, and I want to apologize to those online people who have put some questions here that we can't necessarily address and answer today. But I think what I assume Agbiz Grain will do is to look at these questions to see if those things can be covered. But I think we need to join hands here, and especially heads, and find some solutions to this problem. The consumer is always right, and I don't have to remind you about that. So if the consumer wants to know, you know, how's my food produced, where is it produced, that is something that the market or the chain will have to adhere to and start recording it. What we have to do is, after we've done that, is to tell the consumer how much it's going to cost you to know all of this. And then the consumer can make a decision whether they want to continue. And I think what we haven't addressed today is, I'm just sitting here thinking about, you know, those farmers in the Eastern Cape and those in the KZN mountains, you know, producing their 5-6 tons from their hectare. You know, and you talk about MRLs with them, and you start talking mycotoxins to them, and you know, you're going to reject their tons that they actually want to supply to the market. You know, and this is another challenge. If you're in a first world country and you've got proper infrastructure and systems, and inspection services in place, it is a totally different kettle of fish, and I want to encourage you to keep on thinking about these things, to try and resolve it, because this is where the market is pulling us. But we also have to be realistic. You've heard it's not the exact science from some people who have gone down the road. So best of luck with that. And with that, I'm going to pass over to you, Casper, to take us home.
I want to thank everyone, obviously all the panel members, and I would like to give each panel member 5 minutes or maybe 2 minutes just to sum up and their takeaway for the day.
Nominate for Paul.
Yeah, excuse. So Paul, maybe it's best when we start with you.
Yeah, okay. I think everybody is in no doubt that this is a very challenging subject. It's not a South Africa subject, it's a global subject, in fact. And I think the whole industry needs to work together very hard on this to start implementing better practices both on farm and in the traceability sector. I actually tuned in yesterday to the day yesterday, and I was quite astonished to hear that traders are prepared to pay a premium to stores to actually get their grain out of store, which to me would just seem to be a customer service requirement. But nobody would be prepared to pay a similar premium to help farmers get into good agricultural practice certification and to be able to demonstrate food safety. And I just wonder whether people's focus is in the right area.
David, your takeaway for the day?
Alors, je voudrais tout d'abord vous remercier pour cette matinée et puis vous dire qu'en ce qui me concerne, que ce soit les agriculteurs ou les organismes qui collectent les céréales, on prend souvent la traçabilité comme une contrainte. Or, depuis une vingtaine d'années, on a beaucoup progressé sur la traçabilité, et la traçabilité a apporté un changement des pratiques agricoles, un changement des pratiques au niveau des stockages, et a permis à la sécurité alimentaire de progresser. La problématique est toujours la vitesse à laquelle les choses avancent et l'investissement qui est nécessaire pour pouvoir mettre en œuvre cette traçabilité. Pour autant, fondamentalement, la traçabilité fait progresser les pratiques et elle est également importante. On parle souvent des consommateurs, mais elle est également importante pour les producteurs parce qu'elle protège également les producteurs d'une certaine manière. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Thank you, David. Dr. Charles, can we hear from you?
Yes. There's been a lot of discussion about the costs of traceability and who will pay them. In the end, it really doesn't matter if the cost comes as impressed regulation or market premium or some combination thereof. They're still there. And the system taken as a whole will have to pay them. And also recognize that no matter how hard you might try, grain is not removed from the market system if it is unacceptable in one place and is put back into the market. It's not going to the landfill. And so it will find a home somewhere in the system for a price. And I think we have to recognize that traceability is the balancing of activities required for the various documentation and the benefit that the various people in the system are getting. And if you implement traceability as part of a quality management system, you can very easily get internal benefits, as was mentioned before. If it's impressed and it stands by itself, at least our experience has been that that will not last long, because there wasn't the pull premium to make it worthwhile and essentially quantify the benefit that you get. So it's basically a balancing act. How precise do you want to be? Who pays for it? And where does the payment come from? Be it government or be it the market?
Thank you, Dr. Charles. And then Dr. Francois, if you can give us your takeaway for the day.
Thanks, Casper. I think, yeah, just to highlight again that, I mean, we are in a position now that there is new cultivars coming into South African market. And I think we have developed and spent a lot of time and effort and funds on developing really good milling and baking quality. That is in the high demand by our millers and bakers. Our silo industry is our off-takers of the biggest chunk of this product, and that we just need to make sure that we maintain those standards and that we don't deteriorate the values or I think the quality and the milling baking quality that we're getting in of our cultivars by taking in bulk cultivars that is not really on our national list of millers and bakers that is being published on an annual basis.
Thank you, Dr. Francois. And then from our side, I think it's clear that we need to do a lot of work to get traceability into our sector and to get 100%, not 100% traceability, but to get at least some sort of traceability into our sector. There's many hurdles that we need to jump over. There's operational issues that we need to attend to. But at least this is a starting point, and I think with good communication, the difference between, Vessel, with good communication, we can get together and get a solution for the traceability headache that we currently sit with. Yanni, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to thank our translator, our French translator. This has made it very possible for us to understand each other, but we've learned a lot. Thank you for them, and also Brand Republic for putting all these pictures together and make sure that the agriculture sector can still talk to each other, even if we're not together. But all the best for the sector. This is a high hill to climb. You can only do it one step at a time. And don't worry if it's a bit foggy at the top. You don't know exactly what it looks like, but keep on at it, and you will get to the end of it. Thank you very much for being a part of this. Quite challenging, but I think there were some positives that we can take home with. Thank you, Wessel.
Yeah. Yanni, thank you so much. Sorry, Casper, I wanted to make sure you don't exclude Yanni with his comments.
I've said enough.
I just want to ask for the gentlemen online and the media, if there's any of the media that would like to have questions afterwards with them. If you can just give me an indication if there's any, Sindira, or nobody. Okay, then you are released then after 12. Thank you. If there's any questions, we can follow up with you online. And then I want to, I would like to ask Farmers Weekly. They decided on this book who's going to receive the book, and thank you for that. So Wandeli would have given us a little introduction on his book. He's not available today, but I can just tell you that this book, A Country of Two Agricultures, you already sold out 5,000 copies. That's very, very relevant in the news. He also has a launch tomorrow, and it actually was released, I think, last week on Friday, Annalyn. So the lucky winner of a signed book by Wandeli today is, and you must help me with the pronunciation, Izetu Ntiwandala from Standard Bank. Yeah, please come forward. Sorry? Okay, you have to help me say that again.
Esethu Ndwendala.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your question and for everybody that participate. And now she took my note as well. But I would
So you
look.
must tell us a joke, Wessel. That's what was next.
I'm not good with jokes. When I remember at school when I had to do this debate in front of all the school, they told me that I picked up that you have to introduce your speech with a joke. And I was telling my classmates this joke and nobody laughed. But when I start the presentation or the speech on alcoholism and alcoholism over weekends, then everybody laughs. So. But Jerry, you next. Thank you and we also want to thank our sponsors for their contribution, valuable contribution and participation, because in the end, all of them contribute to improve the environment, the business environment where we are busy with. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Wessel. Well, I've got my hat of AFGRI on today, not Agbiz Grain as a sponsor. So thank you for the opportunity for AFGRI to be a sponsor. AFGRI has grown, AFGRI Grain Management specifically has grown over the past 5 years. But not only in storage facilities and services, we also has grown in capacity and pro-efficiency, so that we will be able to provide those services that we are offering outside there in the market. I'm not going to elaborate on all the broad services that we are providing our customers. There will be a short video clip, but I just want to highlight 3 points. I think the one important point is that we went paperless with an e-account platform, which will help our customers. If you connect to the platform, you've got direct access to stock in the silos and also the status of your contracts. So if you're not yet registered on our platform, please visit our website and get the steps to register. Then also we've been proactive and investing in the talk regarding the impact of load shedding. So we've invested in backup power technology to put all our facilities in a position that if there's load shedding, we can continue providing the normal grain services at the AFGRI facilities. And important is that that's without additional cost. We've factored this investment into our standardized tariff base so that our customers can plan ahead on the normal standardized tariff base without any additional cost. And then the last point, we've discussed through this whole symposium the importance of communication. AFGRI really want to put it outside there that we are open for communication. We would like to know what is your special needs so that we can sit around the table and see how we can get to a solution. And then by closing, if you deliver your stock at an AFGRI silo, be assured we will deliver.
That's it for today?
No, there's still.
Jy huiwer, want jy twyfel, sonder 'n antwoord, 'n vernoot. Staan jy stil, verstruk. oorval deur onsekerheid, tree jy terug. Eensaam. Verg dit baie inspanning. Kop aan kop, teen die eindlose struikelblokke, veg jy om voor te kom. Jy beer stadig voort. Dit is harde werk. Bloed, sweet en trane. Maar jy huiwer nie. Jy neem die sprong. Wrywingloos word jy bemagtig deur geïntegreerde, moeitelose nommerpas oplossings. Jy neem selfversekerd die sprong. Jy is dit eens met die wat saam met jou reis, wat jou wêreld ken. Jy neem die sprong en seevier, tegnologie wat nuwe bane weer, geanker in 'n trotse nalatiging en gebou op kennis wat oor die jare verkry is. By John Deere Financial hardloop ons sodat jy die sprong kan neem.
Yanni, first of all, I want to thank you for your facilitation today. I think you led a difficult discussion quite well. I want to thank all the people that signed in online and everyone here today. And then lastly, I want to thank our sponsors and our panelists. I think without our sponsors, this would not be capable, we would not be able to do this. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.